He said it the way you'd mention the weather. Flat. Casual. Like it was already decided and he was only telling me as a courtesy. Mum, we need $300,000. From your RRSP. We need it by the end of the month. I was standing at my kitchen counter in Fredericton, still holding a dish towel. The kettle had just clicked off. Outside, it was one of those late October afternoons where the sky goes gray-white and the maple out front has finally dropped its last leaves and everything looks stripped and quiet. I remember all of that. I remember it the way you remember exactly where you were when something shifts and you understand, without being able to explain it yet, that nothing is going to be quite the same. My son was sitting at my kitchen table. He was 38 years old. He had helped himself to a coffee without asking, which he had been doing since he was a teenager, and I had never minded. I had never minded much of anything when it came to him. That was the problem, though I wouldn't have called it a problem then. His wife was in the living room. I could hear the faint sound of her scrolling through something on her phone. She had been living in my house for 14 months by that point. I put the dish towel down. I said, "I'm sorry?" He said it again. Same tone, $300,000. His wife's business. Debt she'd accumulated before they married, and some after. Suppliers she hadn't paid. A line of credit at 2 different banks. A private investor who was now making phone calls. He laid it all out for me in that flat, rehearsed way that told me he had gone over this many times before sitting down at my table, and that what he wanted from me was not a conversation but a yes. I didn't say yes. I didn't say anything for a long moment, and he filled that silence the way he had learned to fill silence, with pressure. "You have the money sitting there doing nothing, Mum. You're not going to spend $300,000. You're 64. You've got the pension. You've got the house. This is our future we're talking about." I thought about what I wanted to say. I thought about a lot of things at once. I thought about the morning. I had dropped him off at university in Halifax, the way he had hugged me in the parking lot and then walked away without looking back, and I had cried the whole drive home because I was proud and because I already missed him and because it had always been just the two of us ever since his father died. I thought about how much of my life had been arranged around his comfort, his confidence, his future. I thought about how I had worked 31 years as a registered nurse, how I had clipped coupons and bought my winter coats in March when they went on clearance and put every extra dollar into that RRSP, not because I was afraid of spending, but because I wanted to be safe. Because I had learned when I was young what it felt like to need something and not have it. I thought about all of that, and then I said, "I need some time to think." He looked at me like I had said something unreasonable. My daughter-in-law's name doesn't matter as much as what she brought into this house. I want to be fair. I want to say that I tried, from the beginning, to like her. She was confident in a way that could look like warmth if you didn't know the difference, and for a while, I didn't. When my son first brought her home to meet me, 3 years before all of this, she had shaken my hand with both of hers and said she had heard so much about me, and I had felt pleased, the way mothers do when they think they're being welcomed. It changed slowly. The way things that are going wrong often do. She moved into my house the August before last, when the condo they had been renting in Moncton fell through and they needed somewhere to land. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was what you do for family. I cleared out my sewing room, put fresh towels in the main bathroom, made a point of staying out of their way. They said 3 months, maybe 4. By December, she had rearranged the kitchen. I came downstairs one morning, and the mugs were in a different cabinet, and the cutting boards were stacked somewhere. I couldn't immediately find them, and she was standing at the stove, making eggs, looking very comfortable, and she said the old arrangement had been inefficient. She didn't say it unkindly. That was the thing about her. She rarely said anything unkindly. She just said things that made it clear she had assessed the situation and found it wanting, and made changes accordingly. And my feelings about those changes were not part of the calculation. I moved the mugs back the next day. She moved them again the day after that. I told my son. He said I was being sensitive. He said she was just trying to help. He said it in a tired voice, like this was a conversation he had been dreading, and somehow I ended up being the one who felt guilty for bringing it up. That was December. By March, I had stopped mentioning things. By June, I had started spending more time in my bedroom, reading, just to have somewhere that felt like mine. When my son sat down at my kitchen table in October and told me about the $300,000, we were all ready, though I hadn't admitted it fully, somewhere that had taken 14 months to reach. I called my friend the next morning. She has known me for 30 years, since our children were in primary school together, and she is the kind of person who listens all the way through before she says anything. I told her everything. The kitchen, the months, the October conversation. I told her the number. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What does your gut say?" I said, "My gut said no." She said, "Then start there." I also called my accountant. I called him that same week before I gave my son any kind of answer. I had been with the same accountant for 22 years, a quiet man with an office on the second floor of a building on King Street, and he was the kind of person who told you the truth without making you feel foolish for not having known it already. I sat across from him, and I told him what my son had asked. He folded his hands on the desk and he said, "Withdrawing $300,000 from your RRSP would trigger a tax bill of somewhere between $80,000 and $90,000, depending on your other income that year. You would also lose the sheltered growth on the remainder, and there is no guarantee of recovery if the business continues to fail." I already knew the tax implications. I had worked it out at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, the way you do when you can't sleep and your brain won't stop. But hearing him say it out loud, in his careful accountant voice, made it real in a different way. I asked him what he would do. He said, "I can't answer that, but I can tell you that your retirement security should not be contingent on someone else's business decisions." I drove home and I sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. My daughter-in-law's car was there. It was always there. She worked from home, which in practice meant she moved through the house during the day as though it were her own, making phone calls in the kitchen, taking long baths in the afternoon, occasionally asking me, with a pleasant smile, if I could keep the television a bit lower. I went inside. I said, "Hello." She looked up from her laptop and said hello back and returned to her screen. My son wasn't home yet. I went upstairs and I sat on the edge of my bed and I thought about what I was going to say. I told him no that weekend. Saturday evening after dinner while his wife was on the phone with someone in the other room, I said, "I've thought about it carefully and I can't do this. I can't withdraw that money. It would cost me almost $90,000 in taxes alone, and it's everything I have for retirement. I'm sorry that you're in a difficult situation. I love you. But I can't." He didn't say anything for a moment. He was looking at the table. Then he said, "You know what this means for us." I said I didn't know what he meant. He said if they couldn't resolve the debt situation, they would have to declare personal bankruptcy. He said that would affect their credit for years. He said they couldn't stay here forever, and if they had to leave, they wouldn't have anywhere to go. He said it in a particular way, not exactly a threat, more like a weather report, like he was simply describing what was coming and letting me understand what my decision had caused. I said, "You are a 38-year-old man. I love you, and I can't save you from this." He looked at me then, and I saw something in his face that I didn't recognize at first. It took me a moment to place it, and when I did, it surprised me. It wasn't anger, it was something closer to embarrassment. Like he had been so certain I would say yes, that he hadn't fully prepared for no, and now he was sitting across from me in the kitchen where he had eaten breakfast for 18 years of his childhood. And he didn't know what to do with himself. He got up. He went to bed without saying goodnight. The next few weeks were the worst. I want to be honest about that. I had said no, and I did not regret saying no. And underneath everything, I knew I had done the right thing. But knowing you've done the right thing doesn't make the silence in a house feel any less cold. He barely spoke to me. Not angrily, not loudly. That would almost have been easier. Instead, he was polite, brief, careful. He said, "Good morning." He thanked me when I made dinner. He passed me in the hallway and nodded, like I was a neighbor he didn't know well. His wife took her cues from him. The house felt like a waiting room. I started going for long walks in the mornings. There's a trail along the river not far from my neighborhood, and I would go out after breakfast, when the frost was still on the grass, and walk for an hour or two, just to have somewhere to put myself. I thought about my husband, who had died 12 years ago, and who would have known what to say to our son in a way that I had never quite managed. I thought about the years I had spent making sure my son had everything he needed, and some things he didn't strictly need, but that I wanted to give him anyway. And I wondered when that had become an expectation and whether that was something I had taught him without meaning to. I thought about the house. My name was on it. My husband and I had bought it in 1991 for $162,000, and we had paid it off together over 25 years. And when he died, it had passed to me fully and without complication. It was mine. That had always felt like a simple fact, not something I needed to protect or defend. But I was starting to understand that simple facts sometimes needed protecting anyway. I called a lawyer in November, not because I thought my son would try anything. I called because my accountant had mentioned it, in passing, and because the idea had taken root and wouldn't leave. The lawyer specialized in estate planning and elder law, and she had a way of explaining things clearly and without drama. We met twice, and I redid my will and established a clear power of attorney that specified exactly what decisions I was and was not authorizing anyone to make on my behalf. I made sure the house was protected. I made sure the RRSP beneficiary was updated. I didn't tell my son. I didn't tell anyone. I just did it and came home and made soup and watched the news and felt, for the first time in a long time, like myself. It was my friend who finally suggested what came next. She said it the way she says most things, simply and without a lot of build-up. She said, "You know you don't have to stay in that house while they're in it." I told her it was my house. She said, "That's not what I mean. I mean you could leave for a while. Not forever, just long enough to breathe." Her sister had a place in Prince Edward Island, a small house outside Charlottetown that sat empty most of the winter because the sister spent the cold months in Kelowna now. She had already asked the sister. There was a key waiting if I wanted it. I thought about it for 3 days. Then I packed a bag. I left on a Wednesday morning in late November, early enough that the house was still quiet. I left a note on the kitchen table that said I was going to stay with a friend for a while and that I would be in touch. I left my phone number. I said I hoped they would use the time to make some decisions about next steps. I did not tell them where I was going. I drove to the ferry at Cape Tormentine with the radio on and the heat turned up and a thermos of coffee on the seat beside me, and somewhere in the middle of the Confederation Bridge, with the gray water below and the gray sky above and the island just beginning to appear ahead, I started to cry. Not because I was sad. I'm not sure I can explain it properly. It was more like something releasing, like I had been holding my breath for 14 months, and I had finally, at last, let it out. The house in PEI was small and cold when I arrived, but there was wood stacked beside the door, and a propane fireplace that lit with a switch, and within an hour it was warm. The sister had left groceries. There were books on the shelves that I hadn't read, and a view of a field from the kitchen window, bare and winter white, very still. I stayed for 6 weeks. I walked every morning. I cooked real meals, slowly, the way I hadn't let myself cook in a long time because I'd felt like a guest in my own kitchen. I called my friend every few days. I read 3 novels. I slept well, which I hadn't done in months. My son called on the 3rd day. I answered. He asked where I was. I said I was somewhere quiet. He asked when I was coming back. I said I didn't know yet. He said that wasn't fair, and I thought about that word, fair, and everything it implied about who he thought had been treated unfairly in this situation, and I said I loved him, and I ended the call. He called again a week later. His wife did not call at all. The second call was different. Something in his voice had shifted. I can't tell you exactly what it was. He didn't apologize. Not that time. But he stopped telling me what was fair, and he started asking real questions. How was I? Was I eating? Was I warm? Small questions, the kind he hadn't asked in a long time. I answered them. We talked for 40 minutes. It was the longest real conversation we had had in over a year. What happened with the debt was not my problem to solve, and I understood that for the first time clearly during those weeks in PEI. They declared personal bankruptcy in the spring. It was hard for them. I don't say that without feeling it. My son is still my son. But they got through it, the way people get through things when they don't have another option. They moved into a small rental on the east side of Fredericton in February, a 2-bedroom apartment. Affordable, which was what they needed. When they moved out, I came home. I stood in my kitchen, and I put the kettle on, and I stood at the counter for a moment, just looking at the room. My mugs were in the wrong cabinet again. I moved them back. I stood the cutting board where it belonged. I opened the window a crack even though it was cold, just to let some air through. I thought about something my mother used to say when I was young, when life got complicated, and she wasn't sure what the right answer was. She used to say, do the next right thing, and then the next right thing after that, and eventually you will find you have done something good. I don't think she was wrong. My son and I are still rebuilding. I want to be honest about that too, because I think it would be dishonest to tie this up too neatly. He came for dinner in March, the first time he had been to the house since they moved out. He came alone. His wife did not come. I made roast chicken, his favorite since he was a child, and we sat at the kitchen table and talked about nothing important for a while, and then talked about something real, and then cried a little, both of us, and then laughed about something else. The way you can with someone you have known their whole life. He apologized. Not for everything, not all at once. But he apologized for the October conversation, for the way he had said it, for the pressure. He said he had not been in a good place. He said he hadn't seen things clearly. I told him I knew, and I meant it. I have not given him $300,000. I have not given him any amount. He has not asked again. The bankruptcy is behind them now, and they are making their own way, which is what I always hoped for him. In the simple, permanent way that mothers hope for things. The maple out front is budding again. It does that every spring, reliably, without any help from me. I am 65 now. I have my pension. I have this house. I have my RRSP intact, growing quietly the way it was always meant to. I sleep well. I do not regret the 6 weeks in PEI. I do not regret the no I said at the kitchen table in October. I do not regret either the 40-minute phone call or the roast chicken or any of the difficult and necessary things that came between those moments and this one. There is a version of this story where I say yes to the $300,000, where I write the check and sign the forms and take the tax hit and watch the money go into something I could not control and could not recover from. I have thought about that version. I understand why it happens. Love makes you want to fix things, and the people who love us know that, sometimes better than they should. But I am a 65-year-old woman who worked 31 years in hospitals and raised a child mostly alone and paid off a house and saved carefully and built a life that belongs to me. I did not do all of that to hand it over in a moment of fear. Love does not ask you to disappear for someone else's comfort, and it does not ask you to hollow out your future so that someone else can avoid the consequences of theirs. I know that now. I knew it that morning in October, too, standing at the counter with the dish towel in my hands. I just needed a few months and a cold house in Prince Edward Island to find my way back to what I already knew.